is the NBC News Facebook Republican candidates debate from the Capitol Center for the Arts in Concord, New Hampshire. Here now, the moderator of Meet the Press, David Gregory.
Had you not lost for re-election in 2006, you would have been in Washington even longer than you were. It would have been 21 years, so you've got a long Washington record. How do you address this question? Why shouldn't Governor Romney be the nominee? What is disqualifying in your judgment?
Well, if his record was so great as governor of Massachusetts, why didn't you run for re-election? And do what Governor Romney did in 1994. I was running the same year he ran in 1994. I ran in a tough state of Pennsylvania against an incumbent. Governor Romney lost by almost 20 points. Why? Because at the end of that campaign, he wouldn't stand up for conservative principles. He ran from Ronald Reagan. And he said he was going to be to the left of Ted Kennedy on gay rights, on abortion, a whole host of other issues. We want someone when the time gets tough, and it will in this election. We want someone who's going to stand up and fight for the conservative principles, not bail out and not run to the left of Ted Kennedy.
But you did say when you endorsed him 4 years ago, just those words, that he would stand up for conservative principles, Senator.
Vis-a-vis John McCain.
Vis-a-vis John McCain. Governor?
I believe, to use the experience I have, you got a surprised look at your face. Wait, it's still my time.
Are you going to tell people you're not going to run for re-election for president if you win?
Rick, it's still my time.
I'm just asking.
Okay. Well,
go ahead. Governor Romney, take 30 seconds there.
Yeah. What I'm going to tell you is this for me, politics is not a career. For me, my career was being in business and starting a business and making it successful. My life's passion has been my family, my faith, and my country. I believe by virtue of the experiences I've had that I'm in a good position to make a contribution to Washington. I long for a day when instead of having people who go to Washington for 20 and 30 years, who get elected, and then when they lose office, they stay there and make money as lobbyists or connecting to businesses, I think it stinks. I think we ought to have people go to Washington and serve Washington and serve as the people of their nation and go home. I'd like to see term limits in Washington. As the President of the United States, if I'm elected, of course I'll fight for a second term.
Speaker Gingrich,
there's a lot of work to be done.
Take 30 seconds here to get it.
I realize the red light doesn't mean anything to you because you're the front runner. But can we drop a little bit of the pious baloney? The fact is, you ran in '94 and lost. That's why you weren't serving the Senate with Rick Santorum. The fact is, you had a very bad re-election rating. You dropped out of office. You had been out of state for something like 200 days preparing to run for president. You didn't have this interlude of citizenship while you thought about what to do. You were running for president while you were governor. You were going all over the country. You were out of state consistently. You then promptly re-entered politics. You happened to lose to McCain, as you had lost to Kennedy. Now you're back running. You've been running consistently for years and years and years. So this idea that suddenly citizenship showed up in your mind, just level with the American people. You've been running for at least since the 1990s.
Let me bring Dr. Paul into this because there is a question about who is the true conservative in the race. And Governor Romney said only 9 years ago during an interview with New England Cable News, he said the following: I think people recognize that I'm not a partisan Republican, that I'm someone who is moderate and my views are progressive. Do you believe Governor Romney now when he says that he is a man of constancy and that he'll stand up for conservative principles?
You know, I think this whole discussion so far has been very superficial. And I think the question, in a way, that you ask is superficial in that you're talking about character, which is very important. But I think we should deal with the issues as well. But I don't see how we can do well against Obama if we have any candidate that endorsed, single-payer systems and TARP bailouts and don't challenge the Federal Reserve's $15 trillion of injection bailing out their friends. I don't see how we can have anybody really compete with Obama who doesn't challenge this huge empire we have overseas and the overseas spending. I mean, this is how nations come down, is they extend themselves too far overseas. That's how the Soviets came down. We really have to talk about real cuts, and we haven't gotten around to this yet. So if we want to change things, this is what we have to talk about. Character is important and motivation is important. Our history is important. But I really consider that in the debate format to be less significant than what we really believe in.
You read my mind, Dr. Paul, and we're going to get to some of the tough choices, not just on politics, but on policy. First,
let me say, first of all, with respect to Governor Romney, there are a lot of people who are tuning in this morning, and I'm sure they're terribly confused after watching all of this political spin up here. I was criticized last night by Governor Romney for putting my country first. And I just want to remind the people here in New Hampshire and throughout the United States that I think he criticized me while he was out raising money for serving my country in China. Yes, under a Democrat, like my two sons are doing in the United States Navy. They're not asking what political affiliation the president is. I want to be very clear with the people here in New Hampshire and this country. I will always put my country first, and I think that's important to them.
All right, well, why don't you get a response, Governor Romney, and then I'll come back to you on the austerity question.
I think we serve our country first by standing for people who believe in conservative principles and doing everything in our power to promote an agenda that does not include President Obama's agenda. I think the decision to go and work for President Obama is one which you took. I don't disrespect your decision to do that. I just think it's most likely that the person who should represent our party running against President Obama is not someone who called him a remarkable leader and went to be his ambassador in China.
This nation is divided, David, because of attitudes like that. The American people are tired of the partisan division. They have had enough. There is no trust left among the American people and the institutions of power and among the American people and our elected officials.
All right.
And I say, we've had enough, and we have to change our direction in terms of coming together as Americans first and foremost and finding solutions to our problems.
Let's not be superficial. Let's talk substance. So, yeah. Dr. Paul, there's this question of argument versus accomplishment. The question again comes from Facebook. Heath Treat writes, Paul Treat rather. I want to know what Ron Paul's plan of action will be to achieve getting the House and Senate to help him do all he's promised. And here's the record, Dr. Paul. You have actually sponsored 620 measures. Only 4 made it to a vote on the House floor, and only 1 has been signed into law.
You know, that demonstrates how much out of touch the U.S. government and the U.S. Congress is with the American people, because I'm supporting things that help the American people. That's the disgust that people have because they keep growing government, whether it's the Republicans in charge or the Democrats in charge. But as far as working with other groups, I think my record is about as good as anybody's, because I work on the principle that freedom and the Constitution bring people together for different reasons. People use freedom in different ways, like it does. It invites variations in our religious beliefs, in economic beliefs. We tell people that they're allowed to, spend their money as they choose. On civil liberties, that's a different segment. Republican conservatives aren't all that well known for protecting privacy and personal liberties. And when it comes to this spending overseas, I can work a coalition. Matter of fact, my $1 trillion proposal to cut spending doesn't immediately deal with Social Security. It's to try to work our way out of Social Security. I'm cutting $1 trillion by attacking overseas spending and going back to 06 budget. And I do not believe that you have to have pain. People who have gotten special privileges and bailouts from the government, they may get the pain, but the American people, if they get their freedom back and get no income tax, they don't suffer any pain.
Senator Santorum, here's
have the Fifth Fleet there. The problem with Congressman Paul is all the things that Republicans like about him he can't accomplish, and all the things they're worried about he'll do day one. And that's the problem. And so what we need to do is have someone who has a plan and has experience to do all the things Republicans and conservatives would like to do.
Let me get Dr. Paul to respond.
And then I'd like my opportunity to come back and answer your question.
It's not exactly a simple task to repeal approximately 100 years of us sliding away from our republic and still running a foreign policy of Woodrow Wilson, trying to make the world safe for democracy. And look, we have elections overseas and we don't even accept the elections. No, change in foreign policy is significant, but that's where a nation will come down if they keep doing this. We can't stay in 130 countries, get involved in nation building. We cannot have 900 bases overseas. We have to change policy. What about changing monetary policy? Yes, we do. But we've had that for 100 years. And right now, we're winning that battle. The American people now agree. About 75% of the American people now say we ought to audit the Federal Reserve, find out what they're doing, and who are their friends that they're bailing out constantly.
Senator Santorum, come
toward greater energy diversity and energy independence. One of the first things I would do as president is I would take a look at that one product distribution bias that always favors one product, and that's oil. And I'd say if we're going to do what this nation needs to be done in terms of using a multiplicity of products that we have in such diversity and abundance and get them to the customers, we're going to have to break up that one product distribution monopoly. And I want to do to that oil distribution monopoly what we did to broadcast communication in the early 1970s. We blew it apart. We went to the Federal Trade Commission and said, we need more. We need diverse sources to draw from. We need to service the consumers. I believe if we're going to do it, it needs to be done from an energy independent standpoint. All products, getting the products to the customer, we've got to disrupt that one product monopoly that does not serve this country well, nor its consumers.
Congressman Paul, how do you feel about subsidies in general for a specific energy, and also, though, more specifically right now, more immediately, this low-income program, heating assistance program? Is this something that fits in under your view of what government does do or should not do?
Well, subsidies per se are, it's bad economic policy, it's bad moral policy because it's using government force to transfer money from one group to another, and economically it does a lot of harm. But when it comes to energy, we should, deregulate it like others talk about. But we need to talk, supply and demand. Everybody knows about supply and demand. They talk about oil, and if we had more alternative sources, that we always hope the prices will go down. But everybody forgets that there's 50% of a transaction is the monetary unit. And you don't very few people talk about the supply and demand of money. And when you create a lot of money, prices go up. So it goes up in the areas where government most gets involved, in education and medical care, housing, and in energy. So prices go up much faster than any other place. So if you subsidize somebody and you print money to do it, you compound the problem. It's good politics. Yeah, I'm going to subsidize you and take care of you, but it's bad economic policy, and it's not a good way to find any answers.
Bill, there was one really bad thing. We didn't pay for it. We should have paid for it, and that was a mistake.
Do you have another follow-up on that?
No, I'm going to switch to
Sure.
Congressman Paul. And I'm going to say many Americans, particularly Democrats, believe that health care is a right. In your opinion, what services are all Americans entitled to expect to get from government?
Entitlements are not rights. Rights mean you have a right. Rights mean you have a right to your life, and you have a right to your liberty, and you should have a right to keep the fruits of your labor. And this is quite a bit different. But earlier on, there was a little discussion here about gay rights. I, in a way, don't like to use those terms, gay rights, women's rights, minority rights, religious rights. There's only one type of right. It's your right to your liberty. And I think this causes divisiveness when we see people in groups, because for too long we punish groups. So the answer then was let's relieve them by giving them affirmative action. So I think both are wrong. If you think in terms of individuals and protect every single individual, no, they're not entitled. One group isn't entitled to take something from somebody else. And the basic problem here is there's a lot of good intention to help poor people, but guess who gets the entitlements in Washington? The big guys get the rich people. They run the entitlement system, the military-industrial complex, the banking system. Okay. Those are the entitlements we should be dealing with.
Dr. Paul, thanks.
Because he has a secular ideology that is against the traditions of our country.
Dr. Paul, quickly, how would you use the bully pulpit?
I would continue to do what I'm doing now, preaching the gospel of liberty. I think that the most important ingredients in this country that made us great was our founders understood what liberty meant. And that is what we need. We have deserted that. We have drifted a long way. It involves our right to our life, right to our liberty. We ought to be able to keep the fruits of our labor. We ought to understand property rights. We ought to understand contract rights. We ought to understand what sound money is all about. And we ought to understand what national defense means. That means defending this country. That is the bully pulpit we need. We need to defend liberty.
Right. Defend liberty and?
And liberty.
Thank you. We're going to take another break here. We'll be back to some closing moments